Thank you for joining us here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. A shooter opened fire in a church during the morning service in Texas in a small town southeast of San Antonio called Sutherland Springs. Several people are reported killed, including the shooter, though it is unclear whether he committed suicide or whether he was killed by police. The church pastor and his wife were away this weekend, but their 14-year-old teenage daughter is among the dead. Others are injured, the exact number of them unknown once again, but among them we do know that a 2-year-old child is wounded. The U.S. President Donald Trump and Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted in response to the shooting, with the Texas governor calling it a, quote, evil act. Emerald Waxwell reports on what we know so far.
He walked into a Sunday morning service at the First Baptist Church. There he opened fire, killing and maiming dozens of the congregation. The small rural community of Sutherland Springs is some 50 kilometers south of San Antonio in Texas. Police say the man was killed after a short chase, and that nearby medical centers are treating the victims for gunshot wounds. President Donald Trump, who is on the first stop of a tour of Asia, tweeted, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs. The FBI and law enforcement are on the scene. I am monitoring the situation from Japan." Sutherland Springs is a town of some 400 people, and many of the victims had to be evacuated by helicopter for medical treatment.
Philip Crowther joins us now from Washington with the latest on this story. Philip, do we know more about the events of this Sunday morning?
Yeah, we do. U.S. media and NBC News in particular have now identified this gunman as a 26-year-old local man from the neighboring county, somebody who was known at the very least to people in this small town of Sutherland Springs and might well have been known to members of the congregation as well. This is a very small church in a very small community to the southeast of the larger city of San Antonio. We are still expecting a press conference in the coming minutes. In fact, it was supposed to begin at the top of the hour. From local law enforcement, the FBI might also be involved. That is when, presumably, we will get official confirmation of the name and the identity of this shooter, but also a death count, which we don't have at this point, except from the sheriff of the county where Sutherland Springs is located, who has spoken over the phone to several TV stations here in the United States. He says there are over 20 dead in this mass shooting. There could be dozens injured. That also is not confirmed at this point. The sheriff also confirming this, that the gunman is indeed dead. We don't know how, whether this was by suicide or whether he was pursued by the police and was shot by them, not known at this point. And as for a motive, that is also still unknown, that also coming from the sheriff of the county where Sutherland Springs is located. He may very well be part of that press conference that is being prepared right now. Again, the shooter has been identified by NBC News here in the United States as a 26-year-old local man from the neighboring county. So a lot of parts of this shooting, the worst mass shooting in a church in the history of the United States, now coming together pretty quickly. This was a church service that happened on Sunday morning local time just a few hours ago.
Thank you so much, Philip Crowther there, joining us from Washington with that latest news. We are waiting for that press conference, as you mentioned. Now let's take a look at the latest mass shootings that have taken place in recent history in the United States.
It's the deadliest attack of its kind in modern American history. And as the death toll rises in Las Vegas, the debate on gun control has been reignited. In recent years, mass shootings have regularly made the headlines, a trend lamented by then-President Barack Obama 2 years ago after a shooting in an Oregon university.
Somehow this has become routine. The reporting is routine. My response here at this podium ends up being routine. The conversation in the aftermath of it, we've become numb to this.
Up until now, last year's shooting in a Florida nightclub had been the deadliest attack on US soil by a single gunman. 49 people were killed and 58 wounded at the venue, which was known for hosting gay nights. 6 months earlier, a shooting in San Bernardino, California, claimed 14 lives after a newlywed couple went on the rampage at an office party. 22 people were injured. In 2012, the nation was shaken by a brutal attack on Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, where a gunman killed 20 young children and 6 members of staff with a semi-automatic rifle. An education establishment was also the target in 2007 when a student at Virginia Tech University opened fire on his peers, resulting in 32 deaths as well as his own suicide. Mass killings that became headline stories due to the high number of fatalities, yet in the intervening years, numerous public shootings by so-called lone wolf attackers have claimed tens of thousands of lives in the street, in state buildings and in places of worship across the United States.
For more on this, our guest now is Francis Langlois, history professor, joining us from Montreal, Canada. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us on France 24. Canada doesn't see as many mass shootings as its southern neighbor. Why is that?
Well, Canadian laws are much more severe, and it's much more difficult to get handgun or semi-automatic rifles of the type that are used usually in mass shootings. That being said, there were a few mass shootings. One was in Quebec Mosque in last February. So we have much less, but there are some. But this is mainly because gun laws are much more severe, much more. How can I say that? The law is well applied too, so every gun, restricted handgun, is in a special registry, and the Canadian government monitors who gets a gun, and every 5 years ask questions to the owners, and so that's why there are less shootings here in Canada than in the U.S.
You mentioned a shooting that happened in a mosque in Canada. This one is in a church. The significance, the violence of the shooting, do you think that it changes anything, the fact that it takes place in a house of worship?
Well, yeah, of course there is. This is a very important symbol of, depending of what, the shooter wanted to do. That being said, in 2012, there was a shooting in an elementary school, and although the president and many people tried to reinforce gun laws in the United States, they were not able to do it. I doubt that, although this is a terrible event, I doubt that this will change laws in the U.S. because, the Republicans, and especially the President Trump, are backed by the National Rifle Association, and they don't want a strengthening of gun laws in the U.S. So, yes, it's a very big symbol, but I don't think it will change the gun laws in the U.S.
We just heard that the identity of the shooter is believed to be a 26-year-old male from the area. What is it about men and guns, and why is it that every mass shooting involves a man, in your opinion?
Well, it seems that the rapid changing of the structure of the economy and society, where white males were dominant up until at least the 1960s or even the 1970s, made people or white male uncertain about their masculinity in a way that people use to reinforce or reassure or restate their male values is to buy guns. And it seems that many mass shootings were made by young men who wanted to show their rejection of their community, and also many of them want to be famous very rapidly. And one way that popular culture and gun culture states shows helps people to get famous is by using violence in a very special way. So mass shootings So it might be this explanation, although I'm not sure. I don't have the data on the men who did that, but that's why many men, young men especially, do such shootings.
We've seen several countries around the world tackle the same issue. Australia, for example, that had a draconian policy that basically took everybody's guns in exchange, for safety. Basically, in Australia a few years ago, we've got other cases like that around the world. Do you think that it's ever likely that the United States will have a similar program?
Almost impossible. Almost impossible. I mean, in Australia and also in England in 1995, there were terrible shootings. The two governments decided to enact very strong laws on weapons. I think in Australia you cannot have a gun that shoots more than 2 rounds before reloading. In the United States, it's almost impossible. First, there are over 300 million guns in circulation in the country, so to monitor all of them is almost impossible. Second, although the federal government can enact laws, mainly states and municipal government are enacting the laws that are around the country, and they're not even in every state. And currently, like I said before, the NRA, through the Institute for Legislative Action, controls most of Republicans and lawmakers, so there is no chance that there will be such a law enacted in the United States. The President Obama was not able to do it, and he wanted to do it. So you can imagine that since President Trump received around, $20-30 million from the NRA, I don't think he will go against guns soon. And the last thing, in 2008, the Supreme Court decided that it's a constitutional right, individual right to own firearms. So I don't think there will be any very strong laws enacted after that shooting.
Francis Langlois, thank you so much for joining us from Montreal, Canada. Now, as the professor was saying just a moment ago, gun laws in the United States have become more liberal in the recent years. Philip Crowther takes a look in this report.
There are 90 guns for every 100 people in the United States, the #1 country for gun ownership. Too often, the lethal firearms leave the safe confines of the shooting range. The United States sees 80 gun deaths a day. As the victims of gun violence increase, so do those left behind, the family members, the mothers. New advocates for stricter gun laws appear with each new tragedy.
I can tell you that there's no place I'd rather be than in front of all of you here today.
The new spokesman is a parent as well, the father of Allison Parker, who was shot and killed on live television.
And I'm not trying to take anybody's guns away. The majority of the people that are at this rally, same deal. We just want to keep the guns out of the hands of crazy people. That's it.
This grassroots movement, though, needs Congress on its side to change the law. And it won't budge. Only very few will speak out, and they largely sound defeatist.
Background record checks is supported overwhelmingly by the American public. They're supported overwhelmingly by gun owners. They're supported overwhelmingly by NRA members. But we've got too many members of Congress who, instead of listening to their constituents on these issues, are getting pressured by interest groups or gun manufacturers.
Gun control groups want stricter background checks that are made before a firearms sale in gun shops and in gun shows.
I have both. I don't have any ammo period now, but...
This is where we're told the gun show loophole exists. Private transactions without a criminal background check. There are gun shows like this one every weekend all around the country. The organizers won't let us film inside. We use a mobile phone instead. We attempt to buy a gun the quick way, cheap second-hand guns for sale by credit card or in cash.
Hi, can I ask you a couple questions? Sure. I have no experience with firearms whatsoever. Looking for something small, very easy, just for home defense. Well, what if a friend of mine...
No, you cannot do that. That is a straw purchase. You can go to jail for that.
In this show of rapid sales and exchanges, the salesmen pass the test.
Yeah, total darkness. Under $300 and I can walk out with this today?
Yeah, the 21s and now
gun
227s.
with the 3 mag.
The criminal background check is part of the deal here.
Racket to load a round in, put the mag in. We'd still do a background check. That's why we need to drive.
Okay, and you run that right here?
We would run the background check.
How long does that take?
Send them an aftermarket.
Probably about 5 minutes.
Downside to that is it takes forever to get back. That's what I heard.
So I should have $300 in cash and I'm good.
The biggest loophole is not visible. A police presence at the door helps keep deals legal here. But background checks can be completely ignored in online deals. That is where illegal guns can easily be bought and sold, the ones that can end up in the wrong hands.
Now let's take a look at what else is making news around the world. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. A shooter opened fire in a church during the morning service in Texas, in the small town of Sutherland Springs, southeast of San Antonio. 25 people, according to police, are confirmed dead. Another 20 were injured. The shooter was also killed, though it is unclear whether he committed suicide or whether he was shot by police. The church pastor and his wife were away, but their teenage daughter is among the dead. The U.S. President and Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted in response to the shooting, with Governor Greg Abbott calling it a, quote, evil act. Emerald Maxwell reports on what we know so far.
He walked into a Sunday morning service at the First Baptist Church. There he opened fire, killing and wounding dozens of the congregation, including children. Police say the man has since been shot dead. The rural community of Sutherland Springs is some 50 kilometers south of San Antonio in Texas. Some of the victims had to be evacuated by helicopter to be treated for gunshot wounds. President Donald Trump, who is on the first stop of a tour of Asia, tweeted, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs. The FBI and law enforcement are on the scene. I am monitoring the situation from Japan." Sutherland Springs is a small community of some 900 people. Locals describe it as a place where everybody knows everybody.
For more on this story now, our correspondent is Naibe Reynoso, France 24 correspondent in Los Angeles. Naibe, the pieces are starting to fall into place now. We're getting more details about the shooting. What more do we know?
Well, that's right. Devine P. Kelly has been identified by the New York Times as the suspect in the shooting. As you mentioned, he is dead. It's unclear as if he took his own life or who was gunned down by police. But that person has been identified as the suspect, 26-year-old Devine Kelly. Now, the FBI is at the scene, as well as local authorities, trying to piece this together because this incident happened just a few hours ago. And it's very shocking because the community and the country is still recovering from the mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas that killed over 50 people a little over a month ago. And now this, something that was totally unexpected. A guy went into a church where service was underway at 11:30 a.m. local time, opened fire, killed women, killed a pregnant woman, children, and people indiscriminately. Now, according to the latest numbers, 27 people are feared dead, and a lot more are injured. A lot of them are at the University of San Antonio Hospital. 100 family members at least are at the community center near the church, trying to console themselves, trying to figure out if their family members are among the dead, among the injured. So it's a little chaotic right now. But as I mentioned, FBI and local authorities are on the scene trying to piece all of this together. Everyone is in shock, and it's just incredible to believe that we are still having to report on these after recovering from what happened in Las Vegas.
Naibe Reynoso, thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles. Our guest now on this story is Jonathan Michael, psychiatrist and sociologist, co-author of the book called Mental Illness, Mass Shootings, and the American Politics of Firearms. A very timely book there, Mr. Michael. For our international viewers, can you please explain American gun culture?
Well, I think, It's not easily summarized, but I would say that there's a kind of increasing permissibility to allow firearms, people to buy firearms, to carry firearms. And there really is a growing divide in our country that's been here for a while, but getting worse, which is in the aftermath of these horrific, horrible mass shootings. The polarization in our gun culture really exacerbates. People who support more gun rights, like the Attorney General of Texas today, said that what we need are more guns, that people should be carrying more guns and that makes things safer. And people who support gun control say these are wake-up calls, these mass shootings, and we shouldn't make it quite as easy. But certainly in places like Texas and Las Vegas, it's, I think, for people listening around the world, unbelievably easy to purchase assault rifles in the United States. And we have not only mass shootings, we've had 34 mass shootings in the U.S. since Las Vegas, but we also have just a very high rate of everyday gun crime. 38,000 people died in 2016. Not all made it to the news. And so really there's just a growing sense of despair, because you would think at times like this we'd be able to come together, but in fact we become more polarized.
Now, what do these mass shooters have in common other than the fact that they are male?
Well, the fact that they are male is a big commonality. I think that it just really depends how you define mass shootings. But I think a lot of times, for at least more recently for these high-profile mass shootings, we see that they're very often disgruntled white men. I don't know. Really, I think everything's still evolving here, but the work that I do shows really that a lot of these shooters happen to be white men between the ages of usually 20 and 60, heavily invested in owning a lot of firearms. But I mean, the sad fact is that as we saw in the church today, even in a place like Texas where there are a lot of guns, they're very hard to predict. And so, people like me who study this say that we should try to prevent everyday gun violence, because these mass shootings really just seem to happen out of the blue, even though they're happening much more frequently.
Now, this mass shooting in particular took place in a church. What kind of message does that send?
Well, I think that what we see in the work that I do and other people do is that these are moments of terror, that mass shootings happen in places where people feel like they would have been safe otherwise, like movie theaters or concerts or churches. So these are places where people in society should be able to let their guard down. But in fact, that doesn't seem to be the case. And so the idea that you're not safe anywhere, I think, is what this conveys. And of course, a church is also a very symbolic space. And so as this unfolds, we'll have to figure out, why this church and why this time. But that's really not known at this time.
Now, why do you think there has been an uptick in the number of mass shootings in the United States?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's what we study. And I should, if you don't mind my correcting you, my name is Dr. Metzl.
I'm sorry. We are going to the press conference that has just begun in Stockdale, Texas. So this is Governor Greg Abbott speaking.
And helping out and continuing to demonstrate to the entire world the way that Texans come together to help their fellow Texans. As a state, we are dealing with the largest mass shooting in our state's history. There's so many families who've lost family members, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. The tragedy, of course, is worsened by the fact that it occurred in a church, a place of worship, where these people were innocently gunned down. We mourn their loss, but we support their family members. The first responders and what they've done to help respond to this challenge. They are continuing in their efforts as they put all the pieces of a very complex puzzle together to try to provide their community all the answers they need and deserve. Unfortunately, I'm sad to tell you, to confirm, at least at this moment in time, there are 26 lives that have been lost. We don't know if that number will rise or not. All we know is that's too many. And this will be a long, suffering mourning for those in pain. We ask for God's comfort, for God's guidance, and for God's healing for all those who are suffering. As governor, I ask for every mom and dad at home tonight that you put your arm around your kid and give your kid a big hug and let them know how much you love them, knowing that we support each other. Tell your friend and your neighbor that you support them and that you will work with them. I'm very proud of the way that we have so many people working together to respond to this. Already, in talking to the emergency team in Texas, reported that the Emergency Medical Task Force from San Antonio was deployed to help respond to the magnitude of this tragedy. San Antonio area hospitals and trauma centers have coordinated with regard to patient movement and patient care. The Red Cross has set up Family Assistance Center to help all families affected by this. One thing that is very important for everybody affected by this, whether you're a family member or non-family member, is that you avail yourself of counseling resources that will be made readily available in abundance. Now, we have so many people who have helped respond in coordinated fashion already. I want to express my gratitude to the President who called from overseas, my gratitude to Senators Cornyn and Cruz, with whom I've already spoken, as well as members of the Texas legislature. But when you look at the robust response from just the immediate area, I want to express my gratitude to the Sheriff of Wilson County, to the District Attorney from this area, Audrey Lewis. The reason I say this area is because her territory is larger than just Wilson County. And to DPS Regional Director Freeman Martin. Each of those three will be speaking shortly. But also to the mayor of the area where we are located right now, the mayor of Stockdale, to the Department of Homeland Security, to the ATF, the FBI, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, the Guadalupe County Sheriff's Office, the Wilson County Sheriff's Office, the Livernia Police Department, the Stockdale City Marshal's Office, and the Seguin Police Department. And I have no doubt that there are other law enforcement as well as emergency agencies that have responded to this. And I regret if I did not mention you. Just know that we appreciate the profound way that everybody's come together. I would like to now turn things over to Sheriff Joe Tackett from Wilson County, in whose jurisdiction the crime occurred and whose jurisdiction we're in right now.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your kind words. We all in here know what happened today, and it's something we all say does not happen in small communities. Well, we found out today it does. We need your support. You know, as media, don't blow it out there that, you know, it should have never happened, because it does happen. And we sincerely feel sorry for all of the people that are involved. We don't know names of any of the victims at this time, because we're still trying to work the crime scene. As we get the names, we're going to be contacting family members and letting them know what we have. But at this time, we don't have any names of any of the victims. Thank you.
Audrey. Thank you. Next is the District Attorney, Audrey Lewis.
Thank you all. We know that you have lots of questions that you want answers to, but understand this. Our number one priority and goal is to the victims and their families at this point, and we ask that you respect that as well. We want to make sure to notify victims' families before media gets a hold of that information. It is critical to those families that if we have bad news to bear, they need to hear it before it's announced on the media, and we're going to try to work to ensure that that occurs. We have lots of law enforcement who are all working very well together with federal and local and state agencies, and we highly commend the professionalism that's occurring. But because we have to make sure that that crime scene is handled appropriately, it takes time. And unfortunately, that leaves a lot of victims' families wanting answers that we don't really have for them at this very moment. We will be updating them as soon as we have information and providing that information so that they have the answers they need to deal with either the loss or go to their loved ones who may be in the hospital. We appreciate the work of all law enforcement, and we appreciate you guys. We know that you're trying to get out information. We don't feel there is a threat that's continuing, and I think that the media has done a pretty good job of making sure that that's been pronounced to the public. But we are working very diligently both to inform the families and to preserve that crime scene and make sure that it's handled appropriately. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you. And next is DPS Regional Director Freeman Martin.
Everybody here wants facts, wants information about what's going on, and we'd love to provide you more. But if you came here wanting to know the motive behind this shooting, you're going to leave here disappointed. We have certain facts that we can release to protect the integrity of the investigation. We have to release it in a timely fashion and collect the facts and make sure our information is correct before we release it. We're here assisting the Sheriff, Joe Tackett. There's multiple agencies involved: DPS, Texas Rangers, FBI, HSI, ATF, Bexar County SO, and many, many others. We are all working together to support the Sheriff in this investigation. At approximately 11:20 this morning, a suspect was seen at a Valero gas station in Sutherland Springs, Texas. He was dressed in all black. That suspect crossed the street to the church, exited his vehicle, and began firing at the church. That suspect then moved to the right side of the church and continued to fire. That suspect entered the church and continued to fire. As he exited the church, a local resident grabbed his rifle and engaged that suspect. The suspect dropped his rifle, which was a Ruger AR assault-type rifle, and fled from the church. Our local citizen pursued the suspect at that time. A short time later, as law enforcement responded, that suspect, right at the Wilson-Guadalupe County line, he ran off the roadway and crashed out and was found deceased in his vehicle. At this time, we don't know if it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound or if he was shot by our local resident who engaged him in gunfire. We know he's deceased in the vehicle. The suspect has not been completely identified. We believe he's a young white male, maybe in his early 20s. He was dressed in all black tactical type gear and was wearing a ballistic vest. The delay in getting him identified is there were multiple weapons in the vehicle, and the vehicle has been processed by our Texas Ranger Special Operations Group, bomb techs. There's a lot of work to be done in this investigation. We know that there are 23 found deceased inside the church, 2 deceased outside the church, and now one of them that was transported that was injured has deceased, bringing the total to 26. We have approximately 20 that are transported local and in hospitals in San Antonio with injuries that vary from minor to very severe. We know the ages range from 5 years old to 72 years of age. There's a lot of work to be done. We are only hours into this investigation, which is going to take a significant length of time. We will continue to provide information as it becomes available. We know you're going to have a lot of questions. There are many, many that we cannot answer. We continue to process crime scenes. We have multiple crime scenes. We have the church. We have outside the church. We have where the suspect vehicle was located. We have following up on the suspect and where he's from, his residence. We have many, many people to interview. We have Texas Rangers at all the hospitals locating those and interviewing those who were injured. So not a lot of information to give at this time, but the state of Texas, we have every resource that we have available: Texas Rangers, Special Operations, Texas Highway Patrol, Crime Scene Labs, Victim Services, the Texas Division of Emergency Management. Every resource we have available is working, and at the end of this investigation, we'll be able to answer any reasonable question as to what happened.
Was the neighbor injured? The one that engaged gunfire?
No, he was not. With that,
great. Well, thank you all, and thanks once again to law enforcement at all levels, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. The collaborative working relationship is one that will ensure a swift and certain evaluation of exactly what happened, and we will provide that explanation as quickly as possible. We will be leaving here and going to meet with some of the family members of those affected as soon as we finish up, but we'll take a few questions.
How many were in the church and how many escaped death or being wounded?
Anybody who knows that, feel free.
We don't have those numbers. There were people in the church that escaped that were not injured, but we don't have all that information. I'm sorry.
Was Mass being held at the time?
Yes.
Was the suspected shooter part of any sort of known militia group? Is that being investigated?
Not at this time.
That is being investigated, but we haven't. We can't say one way or the other.
What about him was suspicious to begin with, or what initiated the original call?
Those are the types of things that are under intense investigation right now, and hopefully we will learn about them in the next 24 hours.
The revised total of victims, that does not include the shooter, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Can you tell us anything about a possible raid at the suspect's home?
All those types of things will be pieces of information that will be coming out shortly.
Were any victims outside the church?
Yes.
Do you know anything about any social media postings that he might have hinted that he would have done this?
All of those types of things are being looked into as we speak.
Can we take one more question?
When are you going to release
the shooter's family was?
Say it again.
Do you know if the shooter's family was in attendance at the church at the time, or had any notion?
Unaware of that.
When we release his name?
As soon as possible.
Was he known to the community, or was he an outsider?
We will confirm that when we learn it. Yeah, as I think you're realizing, there's a lot of information. We want to piece the puzzle together before we provide you any misinformation, and we want to make sure that we meet with the family members who are affected by this before we release information publicly. We hope to get this information to you as soon as possible. Thank you all very much.
And the call that came in was an active shooter. There was no calls that came in of a suspicious person or anything before.
So how did y'all know he was at the Valero?
After the fact, we started investigating.
And got the videotape from the service?
No.
The press conference is wrapping up there with Texan Governor Greg Abbott, as well as the Sheriff Joe Tackett, and other officials in the region of the shooting of where it took place in Texas, southeast of San Antonio. We learned there from Governor Abbott that there were 26 people now are confirmed dead. The victims are between the ages of 5 and 75. This is the largest mass shooting in Texas history. Now, we also know that the suspect or the gunman was killed. We don't know how yet, but he was found dead in his car. He was dressed in all black, and his weapon type rifle. Let's cross over now to our correspondent in Los Angeles, Naibe Reynoso, who's also following that press conference there. Naibe, I wanted to talk to you about the remarks that were made about concern.
Is a tool that a lot of people use in order to disseminate information, but they were very clear in saying that please don't disseminate any kind of names of victims. The authorities want to make sure that they identify the victims before they release the names, because obviously they want to let the next of kin know that their family member is deceased before the media gets hold of the names. Also, there's been a suspect name floating around. They don't want any names to be identified, to be released until it's 100% confirmed. So that was a gets leaked, and sometimes it's misinformation. Greg Abbott was also very thankful to the President of the United States for calling him, even though he's in Japan on a very important trip. He said that local, state, and federal authorities are at the scene, making sure that they put all of the pieces together. But as you also said in your statement, the suspect is dead. It's unclear if he killed himself or if a local citizen was responsible for that. They're piecing all of that together. He was wearing a ballistic vest, so that gives you a clue as to, you know, some kind of plan that the suspect had. They don't want the media to release any names at all until they're 100% identified.
That's right. Other details, of course, emerging on the events of Sunday morning. We did learn that the shooter drove to the church and that he opened fire several times from several angles in the church. What's shocking is the fact that he chose a church as a place to...
Was he a known member of the community? You know, was he a member of that church perhaps? But they don't, as I mentioned, it's very difficult because right now the only information they're releasing is the number of deceased, which is 26, that there's a lot more that are injured, I believe 20, and some of them possibly with life-threatening injuries. So they're being very tight-lipped with the information that is being disseminated. But what we do know, as I mentioned, 26 dead right now. The suspect entered into this church with a ballistic a ballistic vest with a handgun or a rifle or some kind of a fast shooting weapon that was able to kill a lot of people, 26 at this point, and that he is dead. There was a fast thinking and fast acting member of the community that did chase down the suspect. The suspect got into his car. He later crashed, and that is where they found the suspect deceased. But as they said in the press conference, it's unclear as to if he shot himself or if the community member shot him. And as I mentioned, I am sure all of that information is going to be released and confirmed as all of the information is pieced together in the coming hours.
That's right. We do know, however, this is the largest mass shooting in Texas history. Naibe Reynoso, thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles.